karmically you did. And therefore live with it, even the boring mom or dad you may have at that point. And similarly, though, you can say, the karmic one is, you don't own me, you didn't make me. I came from my own karma, and I picked you guys, so behave yourselves. You're just temporary caretakers. And you can talk, the child can talk like that if they understand the karma theory, the evolutionary theory, multi-life evolutionary theory. So he goes on and on about how, but basically once we're born, we are depending on the kindness of strangers. Although mom loves that baby, as what somebody once said to me, well, they all look like Winston Churchill. But mom loves it. Everyone is the most beautiful baby she ever saw and all this, And other people think it looks like a little scrazzle. But mom loves it. And that's lucky. And it takes care of it. It's helpless, totally, for years. Even maybe nowadays up to 50. I once went with somebody at some WASP beach club in Florida. I won't say who. And I was shocked when that lady who was in her 40s signed her parents' name onto these, like, this corn gum, the cob and stuff we had for lunch. I was a visitor. And I said, really? And they said, oh, yes, here you can sign your parents' name until you're 55. Terrible wasps, And really. And so, anyway, so the point is that's human nature, he says. We all depend on that kindness. We subliminally know it. We go to a shrink and everything is then blamed on the parents, every single twitch that we have, and we get to where we're really annoyed. But never mind, even if they were imperfect, and they all are, they still took care of this helpless thing for a long time. And taking care was often quite arduous work, actually. Burping, I can tell you how many nice new jackets I had and got barfed on in my life as a father, They love it. You burp them and they barf down your back. A little bit of sour milk, and that's really bad on a tweed jacket, It's not good. Okay, never mind. So compassion, and then I'm quoting the Dalai Lama. He says, no, I think I'm not quoting quite yet. Compassion, which in Tibet is called Ning Je. Ning means the heart, and Je means the expansion of the heart or the power of the heart. So the word for compassion is Ning Je, the power of the heart. It's not just sentimentality, but rather a powerful method of living the good life and attaining real happiness. And then he says, in this earlier book, Ning Je in terms of a combination of empathy and reason. Empathy we can think of as a very honest person, meaning open to the real state of the other, and reason as someone who is very practical. And the combination is highly effective. In other words, practical in doing something about it, the combination is highly effective. In that time, he defined that in a nicer way, I think, than he did in Beyond Religion. And then, although he goes in the same plane, then he says, human beings have the capacity to experience happiness at a deeper level, which, when achieved, has the capacity to overwhelm contrary experiences. That's a little bit obscure, that sentence. But what that means is that we have the ability of such a strong intensity of joy. And when we really feel that kind of a joy, then we kind of ignore like a sore joint or stepping on something or a stubbed toe because we're distracted. We never pay attention to some negative thing. And the human being is like that, because the mind kind of chooses where it focuses. And that's a very deep, actually, statement, although it seems somewhat obscure. Someone asked me last night at a benefit that I attended, where someone gave a marvelous speech about helping people, someone who had helped a lot of people and received an award. They asked me, how can people be so cruel? That's how many people are and behave as leaders and things. How can they be cruel and heartless toward other people? And then I asked that person if they'd ever heard of Wilhelm Reich. Have any of you ever heard of Wilhelm Reich in this room? I'm most interested. Wilhelm, R-E-I-C-H, Reich, like the Third Reich spelled like that, not R-E-I-K. R-E-I. There's a Theodor Reich, who was a famous psychologist. Wilhelm Reich was one of the two most famous disciples of Freud directly, who particularly connected neurosis and repression to what he called neuromuscular armoring. or neuromuscular structure in the body. Has any of you ever heard of him? One person, two persons. That's it. That's three persons. So that's the way. You know, how many of you have heard of Buckminster Fuller besides in this class? A few more, but very few. It's terrible. Ivan Illich. How many of you ever heard of Ivan? Not the one in the book by Solzhenitsyn. I mean an actual Ivan Illich. Ivan Illich. No? Well, again, another one. Oh, you must be practically a dropout. So these are people who have been forgotten, I think. But anyway, Wilhelm Reich is someone, I'm not going to get into it just now, but very, very important, actually, really, in the field of Western psychology. He was early in this century, although he died, I think, in the 50s, or maybe late 40s or 50s. But his psychological thing had a profound impact, but he got lost completely because people were kind of freaked out about his theories. So, God, I don't know what it is today. So okay, Wilhelm Reich, I just want to mention him because I used him in answering that question of how people can be cruel, out of frustration, you know. Because that thing, and I triggered on that over that sentence that the Dalai Lama just said, capacity to experience happiness at a deeper level. So cruelty in human beings, according to Reich, comes when they are victims of what he called the emotional plague. And the emotional plague has to do with a kind of physical structure as well as intellectual structures that shut down one's own sensitivity to one's own inner energies, let's say, and one's inner capacity for sensory pleasure. And that kind of a structure makes them very frustrated, it's a militaristic posture. And he has the most brilliant analysis in one little pamphlet that he does, and in general, about the military posture, right? Military posture is you suck in your stomach. At my age, I can hardly do it. You suck it in to control the diaphragm. You then jam your chin into your jaw, into your neck like that. And then you pull the pelvis back, retract the pelvis, so that you can't feel inner things, so that you won't feel fear in battle or actually tenderness toward a victim, toward an enemy. But what it does is it shuts down your own inner, what you could call, what he would call streamings of your own inner energy. And therefore you live, although in a sense of very tight and controlled and forceful, you live very frustrated because you are not capable of this happiness at a deeper level inside yourself. You can't really hit the flow easily, you know, flow state, what they call flow state. And this makes you sadistic, actually, because you only get pleasure out of seeing others kind of wriggle in pain in some way. And that's sort of your simulation of some kind of thing. And then there's more to it, which I don't want to go into. But I'm just trying to clue that you should all look up that person. You'll find it very exciting. Okay, now his points, therefore, are larger points on ethics. That it's the same that you see in his secular ethics. The common human religion is love and kindness, based on the actual biology of human nature. So that's what he's saying in terms of modern people in the Ashley Montagu type of school of biology and anthropology, you know, that the human being is basically a social animal, depending on the cooperative things. That's, you know, survival of the fittest even has that idea, even in the concept fit. To be fit means to fit somewhere. So fitting means fitting in with the group and therefore functioning as a group through language and therefore being able to overcome fierce individual animals and things and developing human supremacy as we see. We have now reached the Anthropocene, right, era. And through that fitness, and fitness does not mean violence and viciousness and individual lack of concern for others. It means ability to cooperate with others and leverage communal movement and activity in an effective way. Having to do with intelligence, even having to do with, you know, teamwork, this kind of thing. That's the secret of the human success, rather than inherent violence, because inherent violence makes you hard to even cooperate with anybody, and your teamwork sucks when you're inherently like that. You're ready to fight with your own ally, and therefore people will not be effective like that. So alongside our natural ability, and I quote him, alongside our natural ability to empathize with others, we have also a need for others' kindness, which runs like a thread throughout our whole life. This is page 40 of that earlier book. Then two, Spirituality is broader than any specific form of religiosity and is essential for individual happiness and for keeping the world livable. And number 3, then actually, therefore he, I think, believes, he doesn't say this, but I believe he thinks, like, what is spirituality? Spirituality is not someone who wears a white thing and has long hair and speaks in a gentle voice and like there's the lights coming out of their ears and music playing behind them and some, like getting donations for the church, society, whatever it is. Spirituality is being loving and compassionate. That basically is what spirituality is. That's a Dalai Lama's theory, which I agree with heartily. And 4, that ethics are more universal than specific religious prescriptions. And then I quote him, religious belief is no guarantee of moral integrity. Looking at the history of our species, we see that among the major troublemakers, those who visited violence, brutality, and destruction on their fellow human beings, there have been many who professed religious faith, often loudly. Religion can help us to establish basic ethical principles, but yet we can still talk about ethics and morality without having recourse to religion. So this you can see, this was in the earlier book. This is why he then went on to write the Beyond Religion work, to try to get his own sort of advocacy out of people thinking that's just the Buddhists doing that, that's just Buddhist religion. He wants it to be seen as related to human nature. But that's what karma theory is, related to human nature, as I think I laboriously and boringly repeated again and again earlier in the course. So I won't continue to do so. 4, that nonviolence, therefore, is essential to solving the man-made disasters of conflicts and wars. And that 5, idealism, what we think of as idealism, is not as unrealistic as certain modern, cynical, secular theories of psyche and society have made it out to be. And then 6, and this is what I liked in his Ethics for the New Millennium one particularly, because having known him for 40 years before he wrote that book, and having seen this kind of thing generally in the exiled Tibetan community and in people coming from third world countries, a kind of adulation of the materialistic development of Europe and Japan and America and so on. Materialism alone is not up to the job. And then he has a kind of and that's that thing about looking in the drug cabinet. It's that sort of revelation to him, although I never imagined, I'm quoting him here, that material wealth alone could ever overcome suffering. Still, looking toward the developed world from Tibet, a country then as now very poor in this respect, I must admit that I thought it must go further toward doing so than is the case. I expected that, with physical suffering much reduced, as it is for the majority living in the industrially developed countries, happiness would be much easier to achieve. The extraordinary advancements of science and technology have achieved little more than linear numerical improvement. Progress has meant hardly more than greater numbers of opulent houses in more cities with more cars driving between them. Certainly there has been a reduction in some types of suffering, including certain illnesses, but there has been no overall reduction. So in other words, it just shifts the type of suffering. And this was a big revelation to him. To us, it might not seem a big deal, but it was a big revelation, and it's the undercurrent even in the secular one, that material development will not do the job by itself. He's not against material development, but it's just that it won't do the job by itself. So 7, therefore, he issues a passionate call for a spiritual and ethical revolution, and this from the leader of a people that has suffered as much as any of genocide and mass destruction. Though he never deviates from his general theme of world ethics to plead the special case of Tibet, an endangered nation that could definitely use more ethical treatment from all. He argues adamantly for universal disarmament, number 8, sketching a series of systematic steps toward the total prevention of wars and war industries, likening war to a bonfire on which people are heaped like logs, and poignantly recalling his own visits to Auschwitz and Hiroshima. And I experienced a big frustration not long ago when he and I hatched a plan, and we even had a producer, a director, and funding to make an inconvenient truth about the worldwide arms industry. I don't know if you've ever looked into it. There's a Swedish institute that sells a very expensive book cataloging not just, tanks and nuclear weapons and bombs and things, but even like Kalashnikovs and AR-15s, not just the NRA in the US, worldwide. How We all horrified. Oh, in South Sudan, they were like she's machine gunning each other all the time. But who is selling them all these guns? And there's a young woman who gave a TED talk. You can find, I forgot her name, I'm sorry, about that, who went around Africa and Latin America, but especially Africa. And she reports like the bazaar in Mozambique, you know, like the marketplace. There's like shops with rows of Kalashnikovs and thing you can buy for like $20. And the ammunition, and then they give it to kids, right? And then they have those child soldiers and stuff. And who's selling that stuff? Well, the 5 Security Council veto-casting powers are the major salespersons. That's Russia, U.S., Britain, France, and China. And of course the Czechs and the Swedes even, the peaceful Swedes. Bofors, you know, huge arms industries. It's a really nasty value-added industry, and a lot of weapons where they don't do any use other than cause disasters. You know, otherwise people might have bar fights, and they'd break their knuckles on each other's teeth and stuff. But then they start shooting with machine guns. Then like what? Although they can do a big job with machetes, of course. So it's not like just removing or making guns a little rarer would not solve everything, but it would help a bit. I think there's no question. And never mind the NRA and some local things, I will restrain myself from getting involved in that, like Las Vegas. What was that? I don't know. What was it? So, okay. So, Universal, oh yeah, and then some idiot blocked it. We had it all signed, everything, contracts, and we were going to do a thing like that about all the arms, where they're all going and who's doing it and everything. We're going to make a film like that. We're going to have like, you know, seminars with generals and ex-generals. Colin Powell is going to come and talk about it. But never mind, I won't explain it, but it was too bad. But maybe we'll be able to still do it, who knows. He engages in a courageous critique of excessively luxurious living and over-concentration of wealth, and makes a clear appeal. This was years before this sort of like, you know, Piketty, you know, and the inequality thing, you know, that is so intense now. Not that it has managed to penetrate the current victors of our Congress, but how damaging it is to including the people who are at the top of it, the pyramid standing, or at the bottom of the pyramid standing on its tip, you know, instead of upside down pyramid that we're currently creating. Very unstable thing. Overconcentrated wealth. It makes clear appeal for altruism, universal responsibility, and policy. I love particularly his concept of universal responsibility, which is the Bodhisattva concept. That in a way, one is responsible for everybody and everything, and everyone is responsible for everybody. It's kind of an intense concept, which complements the idea of everyone has rights. Everyone also has responsibilities. And the concept of universal one is then generates the wish to be a bodhisattva. And it's only, it makes no sense for people who are only living one material life and then dead and gone forever. So don't worry about it. Don't bother with it. But for people who feel they stay here, there's a continuum, then it's really very interesting. And there's time to deal with everyone. And that's what the bodhisattva intends to do. Based on his well-argued insight that altruism is the essential key to individual happiness and social harmony. He is practical and optimistic about globalization, but not the imbalanced globalization that makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. Point 10, he calls forcefully for religions to focus on personal practice over institutional aggrandizement, tolerant pluralism over bigoted exclusivism. He insists, and then that's a big thing for him with his secular. You know, beyond religion, ethics for the whole world, for a whole world, I can take credit for getting the word secular out of the title. I think, isn't it out of the title, right? It's ethics for a whole world, right? It doesn't say secular, but secular is in there then when you get into it. And that's because it's the India, and then there's a long part in the beginning where he says secular in India means something else. It doesn't mean anti-spiritual, it means respect for all worldviews. But I kept, please, it doesn't mean that in America. It means anti-religious, so that's going too far. And they then took it at least out of the title. So he insists on the priority of spirituality and ethics in personal practice over doctrinal purity and ritual formalism. He shows a willingness to dispense with religion altogether if it only adds to the burdens people struggle with. I remember once an incident at Middlebury College, some decades ago, where firing line guy, what was the name of that guy who had firing line, that right-wing intellectual guy, you know, William... Buckley. What? Buckley. Buckley, that's right. And so Buckley was trying to get him to denounce communism, and he was refusing. He was going on about how he liked Marxism, he liked the idea that they wanted to be more altruistic and work for the people. Of course, he admits the stupidity of the dictatorship of the proletariat and the violence aspect, but he likes to, especially with capitalists, he likes to be contrarian. So he was refusing to denounce it. And Buckley was frustrated. Then Buckley thought he had him backed into a corner, and he said, well then, if a socialist society can produce really good people caring about others and altruistic people, then maybe we don't need Buddhism anymore, he says, thinking he nailed the Dalai Lama. So the Dalai Lama thinks a little bit and he says, okay, we can drop Buddhism, we don't need it. If everybody's nice, we don't need Buddhism. Who needs it? And then, yay, all the Middlebury students went crazy. They thought it was so much fun. And Buckley was all gnashing his teeth. It was like the thing with Carl Sagan, which I told you about, when he said, if we misproved reincarnation, he said, yeah, sure, then I wouldn't believe it. He said, how are you going to do that? He shows a willingness to dispense with it altogether. He acknowledges the benefit of religion sincerely applied and makes an ingenious suggestion about overcoming the paradox of singularity in personal faith and pluralism in social practice. And about like, when you make a religious choice yourself, or you say, this is the best system for me, but not necessarily for everybody else. And the poor guy, he's spoken to 3 popes or 4 popes about, like, try not to convert everybody. Try to see that, your idea of an ultimately benevolent force in the universe might have had other ways of reaching people than just poor Jesus having to go everywhere. And he said that to Baptists and evangelicals and Muslims and Episcopalians and Anglicans. And they all kind of say, yeah, that's nice, yeah, they're polite, but they still want to increase market share. They still want more members, and so they're going to compete, and that's too bad. And he considers it dangerous long before the end of the last century, when all the sociologists and people were all freaked out, and not to mention the Marxists, who were expecting religion to wither away when it comes roaring back into the public square in force everywhere in the world. And look at the original big Leninist, Marxist, Stalinist country is now, he's kissing the ring, like Putin, the oligarch, kisses the ring of the patriarch of Moscow, who's wearing Audemars Piguet wristwatch, a $150,000 wristwatch. Somehow. I don't know how he got such an expensive wristwatch. Anyway, then this is nice in both books. The Dalai Lama succeeds in totally being his usual self in the pages of his book, conveying to people just how much he genuinely feels himself to be just like that. Oh, yeah, this reminds me of one thing I really liked. There was a book of interviews by a lady who interviewed lots of spiritual people and leaders around the world, even I think one of the popes or something, as well as Dalai Lama, and quite a good journalist who went and interviewed people. And she interviewed Dalai Lama. I wasn't present in the interview, but I read it later. And then I know at the end of the interview, and I imagine the way that it's worded, that you can see sort of they're relaxed, they finished the interview, and then she kind of leans back, and she looks like she's the one elite talking to another elite in her mind. And she says to him, well, now, who do you think, Your Holiness, on the planet is your spiritual peer? And it's like that, oh, who is really great like you, There's a little element of flattery, a little sort of associating yourself with it. And she says he thinks for a minute, and then I think she doesn't notice the irony of the question for herself. And then he looks at her and he says, everyone is my spiritual peer. Every human being is my spiritual peer. And he elaborates that. Like, what is this about spiritual elite versus spiritual peer? He says, everyone is my spiritual peer. That's just flattening. It's so kind, so nice, so smart, actually. And it relates to that paradox. Remember I told you about non-dualism, about the truly enlightened person is there with the other person for their sake, their servant, and must be seeing that person to have become enlightened. And of course, I'm not sure Dalai Lama is really that enlightened, but he's definitely an advanced bodhisattva. I hope by now I can be confident. But I don't know. Buddha, I don't really know. But because you have to be one to know one for sure. And yet, you have to see the beings as perfectly all right just as they are. At the same time, realize they don't feel that way, and you engage with whatever they need to get closer to feeling that way themselves. It's a kind of interesting combination. It's different from this thing that you'll read here and there, like, oh, everybody's just fine the way they are. No, they're not. A lot of people are not fine the way they are. But you have to see that some deep thing about the human being is fine. Any human being, any being, everything. But yet, what do they feel about it is the question. And then compassion comes in there, and if they don't feel that, then you're at their service. And I really like that. I think Dalai Lama manifests that to a great extent. And he does not set himself above his readers, speaking with great sincerity and intelligence like a reasonable and practical, if sometimes challenging friend, rather than a lofty eminence or a dogmatic authority. Another time he blew my mind. It took me a long time, I think, to get that with my own habits from my own culture. In Switzerland, only about a decade ago, I had to meet him for some purpose. I didn't afford the time to go and be a student in a seminar he taught in Switzerland to an audience about 10,000 in a giant auditorium. And he's up on this stage with this throne, and there are all these kind of gurus sitting on different sides, mostly Buddhists, but some other ones, and some monks, European monks, Christian monks, and other kinds of rabbis and people. And at one point, he gave his famous verse that he likes to recite to people, that the Buddha says, to the monks, bhikshus, he says, mendicants, a wise person accepts what I say after careful examination, like a goldsmith buys gold after melting it, cutting it, and rubbing it on a touchstone to assure its validity and usefulness, and not just out of reverence for me, or respect for devotion, faith in me. And he was saying that, and then he was leaning forward. He was sitting in Tibetan culture on like a throne, kind of teaching throne, but which is a tradition. But he was leaning forward like this, sort of like a waiter in a restaurant or something, and this big crowd of European people. And he was saying, so I can just see Shakyamuni Buddha, he said, I can just imagine him begging his mendicant students not to just, okay, Buddha said such and such, but to think it over and doubt it and question it and argue with it and chew on it and reflect on it and either make it their own or discard it if it doesn't fit their experience, their reasoning, and their intuition. But, really engage with it and make it part of their own mind, not just like, oh, so-and-so said, and follow like that. And the way he was pleading, and in a way, by imagining Shakyamuni, he was pleading with people in the audience to do that and think about it instead of, who Dalai Lama said so. And I was sitting on the side because I was only kibitzing, like behind all the different gurus, and looking across and seeing a bunch of religious authorities who get to sit like on the stage. Usually the lamas, other lamas from different centers sit there, and then other visiting religious types. And they looked uncomfortable. I noticed a lot of them, some didn't, but a lot of them looked a little uncomfortable because they were used to being an authority in their different groups and cults and whatever it is, and people kowtowing to them and listening to what they say just because they said it. And he's pleading, don't listen to what I say just because I said it. You have to chew it over and think about it. And if it fits you, whatever it is, useful to you, okay, otherwise forget about it. He always says that. And I was so admiring that myself. I really was. Because all these guru scandals that we hear, they all come from that false idea that somehow you're more enlightened, whereas the more enlightened person is more at the service of the student. In the interaction between the guru and the student, the more enlightened one is the servant of the less enlightened one, rather than the superior of them. That's the point. Okay? So then he says this, oh yeah, this I like. This shows his kind of, in a way, also kind of humility. He says that I feel strongly that luxurious living is inappropriate. So much so that I must admit that whenever I stay in a comfortable hotel and see others eating and drinking expensively, while outside there are people visible who do not even have anywhere to spend the night, I feel greatly disturbed. It reminds me that I am no different from either the rich or the poor. We are the same in wanting happiness and not to suffer. And yet the person who is saying these things, meaning himself, is one of those enjoying the comforts of the hotel. Indeed, I must go further. It is also true that I possess several valuable wristwatches, because people do tend to give him wristwatches. While I feel that if I were to sell them, I could perhaps build some huts for the poor. So far, I have not done so. So I must admit a contradiction between my principles and my practice in certain areas. At the same time, I do not think that everyone can be or should be like Mahatma Gandhi and live the life of a poor peasant. Such dedication is wonderful and greatly to be admired, but the watchword is as much as possible without going to extremes. So, you could say that's being hypocritical or justifying his hypocriticalness. It's certainly being open about his own sense of his own imperfection and inability to do something about these things. I remember once he asked me, we were driving in some limo, I was getting the much coveted thing with Dalai Lama among his friends, the limo time, coming back in the entourage from some teaching or some event, and getting a little time to chat personally without a bunch of secretaries and weirdos interfering. And that he looks at me, and there were some people, it was in Paris actually, and they were on the street. And he said, what can be done about it? He was saying to me. And I said, he looked at me like to give answer. I said, well, how about generosity? Certainly we don't want one of these leftist revolutions, which would then make more poor people and more violence. Because people who get to the top by violence are usually worse with the people than even the old people, who at least are kind of lazy and not so hardened. But so I was trying that out, like giving him the Buddhist thing, and he was looking a little skeptical. He was. Okay. So, oh yeah, this is, okay, that was it. That's it. That's more or less what I have to say. Any other last questions? Did it's anything I didn't answer? Well, we have another time next Thursday. Anything else? Emmanuel. No questions. Kant in his Ethic, he has something called the holy will, which means if you have that, you don't just need the categorical imperative, because you naturally, but then he has no example of it or no path to achieve it. So it's like, he lives in Königsberg and more or less Lithuania, and in that there, then later was basically Russia, I think. Nowadays Königsberg is Russia. And he, no monasticism, post-Reformation, Northern Europe. And the idea of anybody becoming holy has been canned, right, by Protestantism. And any kind of attempt in monastic, as Christianity had it when it had monasticism, of, quote, self-purification sort of thing, rejected by Luther and therefore considered some kind of Luciferian self-perfectionism by people who feel they're all unworthy and must cast themselves all unworthy upon the compassion of the divine, right? That idea. So he can't really elaborate. How could someone come to have a holy will, even though it has to be part of his system? But it's a completely unattended part. It's just like the idea that you can understand the Copernican revolution of how your concepts are projected into reality, which was Dignaga's insight. But you cannot cultivate the ability to find the Ding an sich in action, in intuitive, direct, unmediated experience, which would be enlightened experience. So that's an interesting complement and for Kant, and a limitation actually for Western philosophy, I think, is the yoga. Even Descartes later, Descartes goes deep, looking for the self, can't find it. So, okay, if I can't find it, then I can't tell if it's an object. Oh, but wait, I'm looking for it. Oh, so I'm sure I'm looking and failing to find. So therefore, my sense of looking is the thing that I'm absolutely certain of. But you're not absolutely certain of subjectivity. You can be only absolutely certain of an object that you can seize and grasp, which he, deeply in meditating, he realized he couldn't. But he somehow couldn't take the consequence of that, so he has to make an absolute thing out of his doubting, right? If he knew a Zen master, whack, is what he would have received. Oops, I guess I can doubt that I'm doubting. What do you think? He looks serious. I don't know. He's a Western philosopher. I love arguing with Western philosophers. Anyway, okay, bye. What's that?
Something I've been thinking about a little bit.
Yes,
this semester.
what's that? What's that?
In Kantian ethics,
Yes,
when he's formulating the categorical imperative, he
Yes.
offers these three maxims.
which is the golden rule, basically, yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of them I actually feel has a real deep similarity to the Bodhisattva vow.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that you have to act as a universal legislator.
Mm-hmm.
All your actions should be done in a way that you'd be happy. Everybody else in the universe
Yeah.
acted that way.
Yeah.
And that's, I feel like that as a testing ground for moral actions.
I totally agree. And you know Nietzsche's notion of eternal recurrence.
Yeah. Of course, it's in
That's the aestheticization of that experience. You'd be willing to repeat that forever, you know.
yeah.
You only do things that you'd be willing to repeat forever, which I love that.
Yeah, I want to say thank you because I'm a philosophy major here.
Oh, you are? Oh, good.
Yeah, and one of the things that's been so interesting about this course is I feel like I haven't had a step into any Buddhist or
I know, because
Western
of their
philosophy.
Eurocentric
Yeah.
bullshit thing.
Yeah, but
They're only the Greeks.
yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Well, I was actually talking to one of my philosophy professors. and
Oh,
she
good.
said that she wished that they could have some Eastern philosophy.
Oh,
but
good.
None of them know the languages. So they
What's
wouldn't-
that?
But that none of them know the languages.
I
so
know,
it would just
I
be
know.
Superficial.
Well, that's a last excuse. Like the younger, in that philosophy department, the guy I mentioned, the senior guy, who was really great teacher of Kant and things. And the students who came from his class into my Buddhist philosophy class in those days back in Amherst, they were always the best. Because what's going on in England and in Europe at that time is the, connection from the East, a certain level of human self-encouragement that we can understand things. We don't just have to follow the Bible, etc. And so there is already a connection. What they call the Oriental Renaissance, the Oriental Enlightenment, and they're having that. And but then this one younger guy, he said he went along with the senior guy's thing, and he was special in Descartes, that guy. And so I said, okay, well look, Bill, the senior guy, says it's no time to really do it, so he's not going to pretend he's really going to super study it. But you're young enough. How about you do it? Oh no, I'm going to do more Descartes. And it's just an excuse, You could. There's a good. It's not that the translation into English are not that bad now, and it's a matter of time. It's just I thought it might happen in my lifetime, but it hasn't. But it will. It can. It will. You will do that.
Well, that's actually one of
You've
the
been-
reasons why I signed up for this course.
Oh,
because
good.
I wanted to.
Good. Well, Tom Yarnall, you should think about that spring course if you have room. He's going to do Tibetan philosophy, and he's going to go much more deeply into these things, just especially as philosophy. But it's a small seminar, though. I might not have room. I think it's already overbooked, but it may be.
Well, I'm in the
I used to teach that course, a seminar in the
major
spring.
texts of East Asia, so I'm sure it's not exactly.
Yeah,
the
well, China, you see the Sanskrit, the Indian, Indo-European language, Indian, and then Tibetan based on the Sanskrit. I'm afraid does this a little harder. I mean, don't say that to these Asian guys. They get uptight about it. But actually, Chinese language does not easily carry some of the, because it's not a conjugate, it's not an inflected language.
As well, yeah.
It's sort of a little more intuitive. It's also equally deep in another way, but it's very hard to interface it with these things. And I have former students of mine, graduate students, PhD students, who are translating things into Chinese. And they're just translating into the old Buddhist Chinese, which is a sub-language within China. And ordinary Chinese readers can't read it. And they are finally, after years, one of them wrote me, okay, Professor Thurman, I get what you're saying. I'm now going to really look at the Chinese translations of Kant and Hegel and Husserl and whatever it is, and I'm going to look at their terminology for these things and see how it can fit with the classical Buddhist terminology and see if there's where they can meet. Because I said, otherwise it will not come alive to the new Chinese people who are thinking scientifically and critically, because that's the area it's in, the Sanskrit thing. And that they didn't get that. You know, it was a hard journey, or by sea or over the desert, to get to India from China, and things filtered, and then the Chinese language doesn't carry some of the subtleties of an Indo-European language.
Yeah. And the book you recommended was Buddhist Logic.
Yeah, the Sherbatsky, STHCER, STCHERBATSKY, Sherbatsky.
I'll check it out.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Theodore Sherbatsky. Take it easy. Good luck. Yeah.
Hi,
What's up?
this is a card for you.
Oh, a card. How nice. Thank you.
And
Ja Minier. Oh, that's your painting,
yes, it is.
but you didn't sign it.
No, I don't sign it.
Which is it? Why not? Which is the right way up? This
You can tell by the whatever's behind.
what?
This is the right side up.
This is like this, sideways. Oh,
And there's always a label on the back of the card, so you'll know.
the
which
next
way
little
it
bit
is.
explanation.
It's not-
Oh,
it's-
DT Suzuki. I liked him.
Okay, great. Lots of people don't.
The people
like
have
that.
attacked him.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he couldn't fight the Japanese Imperium
Yeah.
during the warmongering time. But you know, which one of them fought the Japanese Imperium in the wartime? Which one of them fights the Republican Party right now? Which one of them fights George Bush invading Iraq with no excuse? Criminal invasion, that is. Preemptive war is not a legal doctrine, right? Of Mr. Cheney, it's nonsense. Preemptive war. Preemptive war means all against all. It's ridiculous, right?
Yeah. I had a question from last time.
What's that? Thank you for the lovely thing.
Oh, you're all
I'll read the card on my own,
Yeah, of course.
not embarrass you. Yes, but
Was there any sense that maybe a lot of the teachings have been lost since
I'm sorry, was there any what?
any assessment of if any teachings were lost since the
In Tibet, you mean, or in India? A lot of stuff has been lost. Sure, tons of stuff.
lineages?
Look at that. Lately, they blew up Amiens and they blow everything up. Different crazy people. Sure, but it's like the grass, you know. The hurricane blows and it's all flattened, and then the flexible stuff just springs right back up. The rigid thing, like a tree, will get carried away, but the grass just goes flat and then it pops up again. Because it's not some book only; it's the heart of the human being, right? So not to worry. But sure, things have been lost, and they're always rediscovered. Okay. Thank you for the nice painting. Now, Ted, this is everything in there. Everything.
Natalie was scolding me earlier.
What?
Natalie was scolding me earlier about that.
Oh, did she see it? You shared it?
Yeah, no,
No, but it's good. But you know, all that thing about all those other people and their theories, that's like called the literature review. And it's a necessary first chapter analysis. But you should kind of find the principal ones, the principal purvapaksas, and then deal with them, and then go on and tell the story. You know, and I think your earlier thing in the general, where you peg everything to the 4 deeds. And, you know, the first deed, I wrote a little thing already just quickly before. The Maitreist movement, you know, is the first deed, right? The Jingji thing. Then the Vinaya, the foundation of the thing. Then the mass non-sectarianism and millennial consciousness of the Ngagrim Chemo, of the Monlam Chemo. And then finally the super emphasis on Tantra. But creating like industrial Tantra, you know, Tantric college. There was no Tantric colleges before that. He created the Tantric colleges. And not just, you know, so he did all sides, monastic, Tantric, social, and Maitreya, which is revolutionary, right? In China, when they hear Maitreya, the emperor gets really upset. Because with the White Lotus Society, they're going to have a revolution because they're not going to be content to slide into Kali Yuga, right? So if you take those 4 and then you relate to the literature, the whole thing, and you know, I think you know, try to keep it more simple.
I will. And then
But we have to talk a lot more about it. It's very important. And then as an appendix, you can do the biography itself. You know. Oh, here, this is yours, Tom. One more time. Next one. I'm going to show a little bit.
The what? Going to show what?
That's part of the book.
Which book?
Man of Peace,
Oh, good. Okay.
future. 4 reasons of why we're going to have a peaceful century, even though the first decades or two have been awful. You know, the Iraq thing really was crime of our country. Crime. War crime.
So that gets into what people are going to do. What are people going to do? People have to do things. Like I sent you a note. What you said last night or last class. You said that the Dalai Lama at this cathedral was saying, you know, I can't do this stuff by myself. You're going to have to do something, and not just pray. You're going to have to go and do something. Yeah.
Everybody has to do something. Everybody's going to do something.
I think that's very important.
The idea that the American government is going to solve the whole problem with this wonderful, you know, stars and stripes, and wonderful democracy and things is now shot to hell.
Yeah.
Because our government has been taken over by criminals, starting with Nixon. You know that thing that Ken Burns showed?
Right.
I knew that thing, but the mass of our country doesn't know that. Well, the Nixon committed treason.
Right.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
But then he didn't underline it, because he did mention that at that time there were 36,000 American deaths. Nobody can count the Vietnamese, but probably 1 million. And you know, and the number of maimed and injured, probably hundreds of thousands. But still, that's what was there at the time that the peace accord was made in 1967, in time for the election. And there was a peace conference, and Ho Chi Minh sent his people to the peace conference. And you could have had a North-South Vietnam situation, sort of, you know. And Johnson knew that Nixon sent people to choose, don't go to the peace conference, so if they can't conclude it, so I'll win the election. Then I will bomb the crap out of them, and you'll be in a much better position with me, which was a lie. And he ended up in a much worse position, too, had to flee for his life. And they overran the South. And another 30,000 or so, 25,000 Americans were killed, and millions more Vietnamese, and how many maimed and crippled and PTSD we can't even count. And it's just terrible. And Johnson allowed a criminal to take by not prosecuting that. So he had tapes. So you have some tapes, you have spies, and you have tapes to find out who's being criminal. Oh, but I don't want to compromise the system. People will say I'm politicizing. That's fake. The real reason is Johnson himself had after Kennedy's death, he had gone more into it to please the CIA and the Pentagon, the people who killed Kennedy. And he didn't really want to associate himself with ending the war, even then, without a victory. So even he fantasized probably that, oh, well, Nixon will do more and we'll really win or some bullshit. You know, Johnson himself, that's the real, he pretended, oh, I can't reveal that we win your game. You know, so I can't say anything. Nonsense. You allow a criminal to gain control of the Pentagon machinery and the United States government and military. They're going to cause a lot of damage. Okay? Then the people who allowed Bush to win in the 2000, which was really Cheney, pushing around the playboy, then they committed a crime in our name of invading somebody without any justification. Preemptive war is a complete lie. That's what that is the law of fishes, that they call it in India, Matsya Nyaya. The law of the fishes, preemptive war. It's baloney. I'm going to attack everybody because you might attack me. That then totally discredited us. And now it's overt and blatant.
Blurt, right.
He still kept some pretense up with W. But he's cute. Oh, it's all Cheney's fault. So now it's all equal level, so now we have to do something.
Good.
Yes. Well, I want to make a shadow government. Talking to people. And as I talk to them, I hear that there are, on the internet, if it was organized and we had a city to put together a huge website that would be showing what the U.S. government, if it was living up to its responsibilities, would be doing. Like someone last night said, there's already a shadow EPA. There's a shadow Department of Agriculture, a shadow Department. In other words, you can read articles about what they're doing to the Department of Energy, EPA, State Department, wrecking every single one. So we want a public thing that's very well known by everybody, where this is what we should be doing as the EPA. And these are all the policies, these are all the wrong things they're doing. And they have all the wrong bad effects. And here it is. So get out and vote for it. What do you think? That's what the British people do.
Well, let's do it. Who's doing that? You got, is it on its
You
way?
are doing it.
Me and
you.
Me and Natalie.
That's right. What else we got to do?
Right, I think
Wait to
that's,
die.
well, I think at least, and even in terms of just for the people that are running in these congressional districts like District 19, our district, those people should have access to all this kind of information. What should, they should be saying, they should be promoting, that should be their platform.
Yeah.
So who's doing that? If we get some,
Well,
get
it's
some
not
people to do
organized.
that.
It's
Well, it's
organized.
organized.
I met that Jean Houston lady yesterday. She's ready to go.
Jean Houston?
Jean Houston. I just met her last night. She's getting it. We had a good night at Tibet House.
Yeah, good.
And she wants to get on board. So, you know, we'll get there.
Okay. So let's get
getting
going. Yeah, do the big
We're
board
here.
check. Okay, good. Here we are. Here we go.
Oh, you know what, I was thinking of the question there about compassion.
Yes.
And I was,
Oh, that's your
because-
thesis. I should have
No,
pointed
no,
to
no,
it.
no,
Oh,
no,
I
no,
will.
no, when it looks, you know, the Tupton Jimbas, you know, the center in Stanford and,
Yes, yes, sure.
and in Emory, they have these school programs now.
I know.
You know, it's kind of
That's
interesting,
great.
and I
It
think
is
it's like, oh, so that's a step, you know, sort of like the
It is.
mindfulness programs.
You know, the evangelicals will attack that if they're
Yeah,
successful.
yeah.
But it's still good.
Yeah.
To try it.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah, and even in the New York City schools, there's some teacher training out there.
yes, it is.
Compassion, they
Yes.
call it caring.
I should have
something like that.
taken it. Yes, I should have. I forgot that was your thesis.
Well, no, that's not why
I was ready. That beautiful thing about the moon and the moon ripples in the ponds and the reflection of the moon. Oh, that's Stand back here, Dick. Okay. Okay. Good. Yeah. See you. Are you going to be in on Thursday? Absolutely. I would not miss your last one. Oh, good. You come to that, and then you basically did budget this, and you didn't really get to the. We actually did. Oh, you did? Have a nice night, guys.
Yeah, you too.
Holy moly, holy moly.